The participants are the core, and the respect for them it has to be and should be intrinsic in everything to do with the project, about the project, in the project, that happens in the project. And then I see it like a sort of like a ball, and they're there in the middle of the ball, and we're hopefully sort of wrapping them in something that probes a little bit, but also comforts, but also questions, and also makes things secure, and shapes and moves, and we all roll along together.
So you have almost as if you're rubbing two stones together and you get these little sparks that fly. It's a bit like that. And you don't know what those sparks are going to look like. It's an unknown. Until you bring those two elements together, artist, research or highly specialised clinician, you don't know what's going to happen. And then you bring these two things together and it is like magic, actually. There's no knowing in what direction those ideas are going to go. There's no knowing what the repercussions are going to be from our intervention, from our meeting. And that's so exciting. So then it's kind of harnessing it and going, okay, how can we actually make use of these exciting ideas? How can we apply this so that our community is of benefit, not just now, but like looking into the future?
Yeah, so I've really had the privilege of working with people from families affected by familial Alzheimer's disease for over 15 years now, and it's a very much a partnership. The research that we do is shaped by our discussions, and they have involvement at every stage. And when I saw the call for the Trellis Arbor programme, I knew that I wanted to apply and wanted to give the families that I work with the chance to have a voice and a place in the new centre. I wanted their stories to be very much a part of the fabric there. And yeah, I was fortunate that I met Bryony, who was very much on the same wavelength, and introduced her to the group very early on. And very gradually, you met them first in online meetings. So it was an evolving process, a partnership really throughout the project. And they very much inputted on the ideas that we took forward.
The idea to go to the beach came quite early on from a photo. Very early on, actually. It was like one of the first things I saw from a participant. Her dad used to draw mazes in the sand on the beach for the kids, and this is her dad who's since died, and Natalie was quite close to as a patient. And that symbol of the maze on the beach being then washed away, inevitably washed away by the tide, seemed like a really powerful, sort of perfect analogy for the struggle of living with FAD. And
but that was really poignant for me as well, that this became such a big part of it, because her father was someone I knew. He was one of the first people I worked with as a research participant, and one of the first people who participated in the Dominantly Inherited Alzheimer Network study, which is a big international study now with centres across the world. But when it started, he was one of the first people to join it, and was just so supportive of us doing this, and actually so supportive of us setting up the support group, one of the early members of that, and that he is a part of this project, and that it's been a lovely thing for us to connect on. It's a real legacy, I think.
It definitely pushed your boundaries in, like, risk-taking. Because do you remember, like, the idea of the beach, I think, came up very early. And I think Natalie's response was like, oh, we can't take a patient group to the beach. That's like a health and safety nightmare. And then gradually, as everybody got to know each other and they got to trust me and we got to know each other, it became a reality, and it happened. And that's because of a slow, thorough building of relationships. We couldn't have said on day one, who wants to go to Margate? But it's like careful planning, careful thought, really solid relationships, that something almost unthinkable managed to come from it.
Yeah, it's very levelling being involved in a creative project and a co-production project where you're all bringing your ideas, but the kind of traditional barriers between doctor and patient, or scientist and participant, are broken down, and that's really, really valuable.
Going on the walks was a big thing for me, and hearing the patients talking about the walks and their histories. Because everybody has a fascinating memory, and everyone has great stories.
I'm not from London, and I didn't grow up a huge amount in this country, and I was trying to remember when this was, but I think it must have been when I was about 7 or 8 living in Turkey. And we just had endless videos of things. I remember watching kind of Bedknobs and Broomsticks over and over again. And of course in there is Portobello Road. And so then, having grown up with those visions of London in my head, there was someone who grew up on Portobello Road that we went down with. And for me, it was just mind-blowing to realise the history of it. And I found that a very profound experience, because it kind of made me travel back to those memories of what I believed the place I was from to be like. I found it a really evocative experience, and particularly being taught by someone who grew up there and told you how things had changed and what had been different. And so I found that just a really moving experience, one which, you know, I probably wouldn't have had in any other circumstance.
It's interesting that you mentioned that experience, because I did live very close to Portobello when I was a student.
Yeah.
And so for me, when we went on the walk, I was getting floods of my own memories. It was quite an interesting experience, having my own memory and Edward, our participants' memory, all kind of intermingling, and sort of this sort of layers of experience that we each had. I found that really, really fascinating. And working in that way was a very different way for me to work, actually. I have worked with people in the past, but I've never worked so intensely with them. And like Tom's saying, you know, we were in their homes, we were walking in areas that they'd lived in for years. We were talking about their memories, which is a very intimate thing. I've never worked so closely with people before in that way, and it was really nourishing, actually, and gave me so much to work with. And I think it also, value taking my work further on, gave me maybe ideas of how I might work with people in the future on projects as well.
And I think we connected not through the research, but we connected through the different ways of engaging with our practices, perhaps. And there was a theme of nature on it. And so the way we started working on this was to visit each other's workplaces first. So we went to Lucy's studio, Mars, and my lab. I think it was necessary because I don't know if we knew how to work together. I think you have more experience with working. You have worked with researchers
before, but not. Yeah, interestingly, it was just it was really different this time. And I've said this to you before. It feels like I've worked with researchers quite a lot before, and it's been very collaborative. But there's still an element of sort of really working hard not to just sort of translate the practice of the research. And this, from the very beginning, like I remember we met at Mars Computer Lab, and we sat in a room and we had a big board, and you were talking about Neil Gaiman and I was talking about something. We were talking about, it was chaos, absolute chaos, but it was like, rather than me proffering an idea, which maybe is what happens before, and then getting sort of feedback from researchers, the idea kind of came from us, you know, and it was challenging for me at times, because I'd be like, what the fuck is this? You know, like, but it was sort of like, and even things like, I would never in my mind, the WhatsApp thing kind of came through through the advisors, but then was kind of backed up by you, and I was like, there's no way we could do this, and then it was like, actually it worked.
What it was very surprising to me in this project was how the creative process it happens both in research and more in an artist practice, but they are shaped very differently. And this one to me felt very uncomfortable at many times, because it felt like, how are we going to materialize all this? So there's all ideas and these and that and how does it crystallize? I can't see it. and it was always like this battle of like, and Lucy would be like, it's going to be fine. It's coming. This is the process. I was like, what do you mean this is the process?
Sorry.
But it was so interesting, because then something I could not see coming up from it is the fact that how all these things with value were coming out of a process that to me felt very messy. It was very nice, because it was like, you can just put faith in the process and something will happen. Things. I think one thing with researchers interacting with people with lived experience is that perhaps if you do research, as Mar and me is the case, that is not a clinical type of research, so doesn't have the need actually to interact with people to happen. Some people might question what's the value, what's the need to go there and talk to them if it's not 100% translatable to your research. And I think the human experience of doing research is very important, and that bringing the abstractions of numbers and the abstractions of hypotheses of might be happening to a disease to real life might be very valuable for some type of researcher, not for everyone, maybe. But for us, really had a value in getting a motivation back in your work and being like, this is real life.
I think from the carers, there's something about being able to physically see and speak to a researcher with a face, you know, and kind of demystify a researcher, but also understand that they were really, you know, some of the conversations were really interesting, and I think they really grasped what we were talking about the other day, that it was like part of, you know, what Tatiana and Mark are working on is really hard, and they're not going to potentially, you know, be on the front page of the news having come up with a cure. It's a very small part of a very complex puzzle, but they really, once they met them, there was some real warmth. It was quite human. It was like, you're trying, and that matters to us, you know, and that we can see a real person is there somewhere, not just a stat or something.
Not just a university or a
Yeah,
building.
I think that felt really important for me.
With our workshop, we did a collective workshop with everyone on Zoom, and it was all about water. It was all about watery things, and the main aim was to think about what water means and what swimming means. And we invited people to bring any recollections of water or swimming experiences, to bring water if they could. Could be bath water, could be tap water, could be river water, which you brought river water, didn't you?
Yeah, it was water from a stream. My 87-year-old dad climbed into a ditch to collect water from a stream we used to go to when I was a kid.
Great.
Brought that along.
Yeah, it was lovely. So we shared this, and all our participants shared their memories and special places with water. It was just lovely the way that allowed the conversation to open up, and people saying, yeah, but I swam in this sea, you know, this is the place I really remember as the swim. And then we did some creative work, and all together collectively at the same moment simultaneously we all made marks on our card that everyone had with ink, and then we folded it and opened it to create these wonderful mirrored images. And it just caused a lot of conversation and thinking, but the bit that stays with me is that when everyone was doing that, it was really quiet. Everyone was thinking, and they were working away, and then all of a sudden there were these really colourful, lovely images being shared.
You know, what did make me wonder is that, you know, it's all very well, you know, we can sit in our clinics and say to patients, you know, you need to be more active, and physical activity, for example, is one of the major kind of treatments or strategies we have for managing neuromuscular diseases, because there's no cure, as I mentioned before. The kind of thing that's probably more likely to make a difference is if they were to be sitting in that workshop and hearing some of our participants talking about swimming. You know, the one of them was doing wild swimming, for example. There's another lady that goes to her local swimming pool. She knows everyone there, but she was talking about seeing the blossom on trees on the way there and how it made her feel, and then the feeling of being in the water, the gliding through the water and feeling this kind of freedom of movement, and that kind of is that kind of powerful, evocative kind of descriptions of swimming that I think hold, you know, great potential to kind of motivate people and engage people in the future in something which, you know, we know is a really useful thing for people with neuromuscular diseases to be doing.
It's hard to put into words, but I think there's one drawing that comes to mind of this very sweet house, like a childhood house, and there's like flowers or roses on the pathway. And on one side is a very, I guess that drawing is a little bit of the soul of the broader amount of drawings that we have collected, but also it sort of echoes a lot of the conversations that we've had. And it kind of really symbolises how even simple prompts touched people at the heart in a way, really thinking really at their experience when responding to the prompts. There's a real sense of empathy and a bit of also of compassion in that drawing, which I think it also has been through the process of the project.
I think I was pleasantly surprised when I was sort of testing out some of the workshop materials on some colleagues, or some of them were doing it. Just that I'd never really had some of those more creative conversations with some of my colleagues, because that's not the way we do things, and it's not what we're focusing on. but to think about if there's a space for that as well that can help us work together.
When this project was advertised, the Trellis Arbor project, I'd seriously been looking for something like this for about 20 years, because I've always been fascinated by cognition and perception. That was always my fascination, was how we understand the world, how we process, and how it's so different amongst everyone. And so the opportunity as an artist to work with a neuropsychologist, this is an amazing opportunity for me to really develop an interest of mine with all that amazing knowledge. So it's I was so happy.
And how has my practice changed? I think, you know, when I first heard about the project, it just seemed like a lot of fun and just so different from normal working life. And I had no idea where it was going to go. If it was going to go anywhere, you just go to the first mixer event, and like I saw Alison and she just seemed like a lot of fun, and so I thought it would be nice to work with her and the details would sort of work themselves out. But actually it's just sort of taken off and it's sort of just become bigger than whatever I thought it would be. And, you know, we've had lots of ideas. We've done 2 subsequent projects together, which I would never have even thought about this as a topic or thought about the way in which, you know, we've been working together. Wouldn't have done that on my own. So what started off as a piece of fun has just grown so much into something else. Still fun, but just completely different and a lot more meaty, I suppose. And it feels like it's actually quite an important area that hasn't really been examined, you know, thinking about sort of social functioning in young people with Parkinson's. What can we actually do to facilitate social integration and using sort of creative approaches? And so a completely different perspective has really opened up my practice into a whole new way.